Attention! What you are about to hear may shake the very foundation of how you see West Africa. Tonight we bring you a revelation that no television channel has dared to air. For months, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, had remained silent, calm, disciplined, and focused on rebuilding his nation. But that silence has just been broken, and what followed wasn't a speech. It was an explosion. In a meeting broadcast across Ouagadougou, Traoré placed on the table classified documents files so sensitive that several embassies immediately demanded urgent clarification. According to the Burkina president, these papers prove that the recent elections in Côte d'Ivoire hide something far darker, a network of protection money and power, shielding those who seek to destabilize Burkina Faso itself. The man he accuses President Alassane Ouattara, long considered one of the West's most reliable allies in the region. But in Traoré's words, that friendship has become a mask. Behind it lies betrayal, covert operations, and an unholy pact with those who threaten Africa's revolution. His tone wasn't diplomatic, it was surgical, cold. And as the room of journalists fell silent, Traoré declared, "We are not against the Ivorian people, but against those who host and protect the enemies of Burkina Faso." So tonight we must ask ourselves, if these revelations are true, has Côte d'Ivoire quietly become the Western front line in a new war, not of guns but of influence and betrayal? And if so, what will happen when Africa's new revolution meets the old empire's shadow? Stay until the end, because the final revelation may truly chill your blood. Please share if you believe the truth deserves to be heard. Subscribe if you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré speaks not just for Burkina Faso, but for every African nation seeking its sovereignty. It began as a press conference, but it quickly turned into a trial of truth. The cameras were rolling inside the modest presidential hall in Ouagadougou. Rows of journalists sat poised with pens and microphones, expecting a routine diplomatic briefing. Instead, they found themselves witnessing a head of state speak with the raw honesty of a soldier who had seen too much. The first question came from a veteran reporter, her tone measured yet loaded. "Mr. President, the relations between Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire have grown execrables. You've said before that you are not against the Ivorian people, but against those who harbor enemies of your nation. When can we expect a thaw, a new ambassador between our two countries?" Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. His hands rested on the desk, his eyes still as stone. "That depends on them," he said. "We didn't start this situation." The room stiffened. Reporters leaned forward. He continued, recalling that on the very day of September 30th, when he first took power, President Alassane Ouattara was among the first to call him. "Even his brother came to see us twice," Traoré said, his voice tinged with regret. "Yes, relations were good. But then, he wanted us to follow a certain direction, and we could not." He paused. "A revolution is a rupture," he said slowly. "We are not here to follow. We are here to rebuild." That was the moment the tone shifted. From diplomacy to defiance. According to Traoré, everything changed when Burkina refused to align with Ivory Coast's political agenda. One by one, former elites who lost their privileges fled across the border. They didn't disappear, they were received, housed, and even protected. "We observed this for almost 2 years," he explained. "We spoke with them many times. They told us, follow procedure, let justice issue mandates. We did everything by the book. But they never answered. Never." His voice hardened. The soldier in him emerged sharp, unfiltered. "So yes, I say it clearly, those who attack Burkina today are protected there." You could feel the temperature drop in the room. Every journalist knew the weight of those words. Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire share not just borders, they share families, language, trade, and over 2 million Burkina citizens living on Ivorian soil. A public accusation like this wasn't just news. It was a geopolitical earthquake. Traoré's statement drew a line that few African leaders have dared to draw in public, that political hospitality has become a shield for subversion. That neutrality has been weaponized. He leaned forward slightly, his tone measured but unyielding. "They host them, they protect them, they pay them. We know who they are. They know that we know. And still they act against us. For nearly 2 years, he said Burkina had tried every diplomatic route, formal letters, intelligence cooperation, judicial channels, but all led to silence. What was once fraternity between two nations had now curdled into mistrust and betrayal. Burkina Faso, he reminded the room, had endured decades of manipulation from coups whispered in embassies to economic pressure disguised as aid. But this time the betrayal was closer, personal, and more dangerous. It was coming from a neighbor. When asked if he feared the consequences of his words, Traore simply smiled, a soldier's smile, restrained but certain. "We are not afraid of the truth," he said. "We are only afraid of hypocrisy." That line, "afraid of hypocrisy," would echo across African airwaves by nightfall, because beneath the surface of that calm press conference lay something deeper, a declaration that the age of silent submission was over. This was not just a dispute between two presidents. It was the collision of two visions of Africa, one still tied to the old system of dependency, the other fighting to stand free. And that collision, Traore warned, would not end in silence. The air in the room thickened. One journalist, visibly nervous, adjusted his glasses and asked what everyone else was too afraid to say aloud. "Mr. President, are you telling us that Côte d'Ivoire is serving as a base arrière, a rear base for forces trying to destabilize Burkina Faso?" Traore didn't hesitate. His reply came like a verdict. "It's even more than that. The enemies of Burkina Faso are there, visible, protected, and paid." A stunned silence fell over the hall. Cameras zoomed in. No one moved. For a second, even the translation headphones stopped crackling, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He leaned closer to the microphone, his tone now cutting through the air like a blade. "Let's not lie to ourselves. The Ivorian government is flirting with the terrorists. Do you really believe their army is so powerful that the terrorists fear them? No. There's a pacte de non-aggression, a pact of non-aggression. They look the other way. And in doing so, they have become a base of operations." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. His words carried the weight of classified intelligence, field reports, and military observation. Burkina Faso's security forces had long tracked movements of armed groups slipping across the borders at night, disappearing into northern Côte d'Ivoire. Yet each time Ouagadougou sent a diplomatic note, the reply was always the same: "We'll investigate." And nothing ever happened. Now, in front of the world, Traore was saying what many African soldiers had whispered for years, that terrorism in the Sahel doesn't just survive, it is hosted. He looked straight into the cameras, his eyes unwavering. If this continues, it will consume them. The day they no longer benefit from this arrangement, the terrorists will turn on them. And Côte d'Ivoire will collapse. That sentence, "Le pays va sombrer," was like a thunderclap. You could almost feel its echo crossing the border into Abidjan, rippling through the corridors of the Ivorian presidency, through French diplomatic circles, and all the way to Washington. Within hours, reports surfaced that several embassies in Ouagadougou had requested urgent clarification regarding the president's accusations. Others simply went silent. In Abidjan, the state media ignored the comments altogether, a silence louder than denial. But the streets of West Africa were already talking. On social media, Burkinabe and Ivorians debated furiously. Some called Traoré reckless, others called him courageous. One comment captured the mood perfectly. He said what every soldier in Africa has known for years, that terrorism survives only where it is convenient. Meanwhile, in neighboring Mali and Niger, Traoré's words struck a chord. Officials from the AES alliance, the new Sahel coalition, privately praised his courage. "He is saying out loud what others whisper behind closed doors," one Malian officer told local media. Even in France, a few analysts on late-night TV panels struggled to contain their unease. The implication was devastating that one of Paris's closest allies, Alassane Ouattara, might be turning a blind eye to forces undermining the Sahel's new independence movement. And then came the warning, not from Traoré, but from those watching him. If these accusations prove true, the fragile peace of West Africa could unravel overnight. But Traoré didn't blink. He wasn't seeking applause. His tone remained calm, almost chillingly so. "We are not against the Ivorian people," he repeated. "But if a neighbor allows his house to become the enemy's shelter, then he cannot complain when fire spreads." The line was simple yet devastating. It carried the logic of a soldier and the poetry of a revolutionary. By nightfall, the story had already become global. Western outlets described it as a diplomatic bombshell. Pan-African voices called it the most honest speech of the decade. What no one could deny was this: Ibrahim Traoré had changed the rules of diplomacy. No longer was silence a sign of strength, it was complicity. And for the first time in years, an African president stood before the world not as a subordinate of foreign alliances, but as a man who dared to say what others only dared to think. As Traoré's words echoed across West Africa, they did more than stir politicians, they awakened the people. In Abidjan, the economic capital of Côte d'Ivoire, Café buzzed with whispers. "Did you hear what the Burkina Faso president said?" some asked. Taxi drivers debated between pride and fear. For millions of Ivorians, this wasn't just a diplomatic quarrel, it was personal. Because nearly every family in Côte d'Ivoire has a Burkina Faso cousin, colleague, or friend. Over 2 million Burkina Faso citizens live and work in Côte d'Ivoire. They farm cocoa-built homes and raise families on Ivorian soil. Overnight, they found themselves in an uncomfortable spotlight, treated not as neighbors, but as potential spies of a revolution across the border. Some employers quietly dismissed workers, others faced harassment. On social media, hashtags began circulating, some defending fraternity between the two nations, others calling for vigilance. The human cost of the political firestorm was already being felt. When asked about this tension, Traoré's response was firm but compassionate. "We are not here to divide nations," he said. "We are here to speak truth, and truth sometimes hurts before it heals." He knew the danger of his words. Every statement he made carried weight, not just in diplomacy, but in the lives of ordinary people, farmers, traders, families caught between loyalty and survival. But for him, silence was the greater danger. In Ouagadougou, thousands gathered in solidarity rallies. Young Burkina Faso waved flags and sang songs of unity, shouting, "On ne pactise pas avec les terroristes," "We don't make pacts with terrorists." To them, this wasn't about Côte d'Ivoire. It was about a generation of Africans tired of political masks and secret deals. Across the border in northern Ivorian towns like Korogo and Odiene, local leaders tried to calm fears. They called for peace, insisting that brotherhood must not be broken by politics. But beneath the surface, unease lingered. Rumors spread of hidden camps of armed movements shifting positions at night. The line between truth and paranoia grew thin. Meanwhile, in Abidjan's parliament, opposition members seized on the controversy to question their own government. If there is nothing to hide, one lawmaker said, "Why not open an independent investigation?" No answer came. Diplomatic relations between the two countries began to freeze. The exchange of ambassadors stalled. Joint security meetings were postponed indefinitely. What had begun as an accusation now shaped a new reality, a slow-motion political divorce between two nations once bound by blood and commerce. Inside Burkina Faso, the speech hardened Traoré's image as a man of conviction, but also isolated him further from the regional establishment. Neighboring governments grew nervous. Some feared that his courage might be contagious. In private, Western diplomats described the situation as dangerous populism. But among ordinary Africans, the tone was different. They saw something they hadn't seen in decades, a leader who refused to hide behind diplomatic smiles. One elderly market woman interviewed in Ouagadougou said it best: "He may make mistakes, but at least he speaks like a man who loves his country more than his position." And perhaps that was the true cost and the true gift of Traoré's declaration. It disrupted comfort. It forced a reckoning. It made people ask whether peace without truth is really peace at all. Because beyond the borders, beyond embassies and press statements, something larger was shifting a collective consciousness, a sense that Africa's revolutions were no longer fought in jungles or by armies, but through truth spoken aloud. In Washington, the news broke like a diplomatic earthquake. Cable analysts scrambled to interpret Traoré's words. Did he just accuse a U.S. ally of harboring terrorists? One anchor asked on a late-night segment. The White House offered no immediate comment, but inside the State Department Africa desk, officials were suddenly awake after hours. Côte d'Ivoire has long been considered one of Washington's most stable partners in West Africa, a key node for counterterrorism coordination and economic investment. If Traoré's claims were true, it meant that the carefully constructed map of Western influence in the Sahel was starting to crack. And if they were false, it meant a young African leader had just called out hypocrisy at the highest level and dared the world to prove him wrong. Either way, it was uncomfortable. American analysts described Burkina Faso's rhetoric as dangerously nationalist. But others, especially within the African diaspora in the U.S., saw something different: courage. In community centers from New York to Atlanta, people whispered Traoré's name with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "He's not supposed to talk like that," one Burkina Faso American veteran said, but he did. He spoke for all of us who've watched Africa being lectured, not listened to. Across the Atlantic in Paris, the tension was palpable. France has long backed President Alassane Ouattara, seeing Côte d'Ivoire as its anchor in Francophone Africa. Now a leader from a neighboring country, a soldier barely in his 40s had just accused that anchor of betrayal. French officials dismissed the statement as unsubstantiated, but privately diplomats feared something worse: that Traoré's message might resonate. Because beyond the accusation lay a subtext, a vision of Africa no longer dependent on Western validation. When Traoré said, "We will build our own army. We will train our own soldiers," he wasn't just talking about defense, he was talking about dignity. In Moscow, the reaction was markedly different. Russian state media hailed Traoré as a new generation of African leadership: pragmatic, patriotic, unafraid. The message fit neatly into Moscow's strategy position itself as the partner of sovereign Africa against what it calls neo-colonial manipulation. China, characteristically quiet, made no public statement, but began hinting at deeper cooperation with the AS alliance in economic forums. Meanwhile, in the halls of the United Nations, delegates from smaller African nations found new confidence. For the first time in years, discussions about African sovereignty weren't whispered, they were shouted. Burkina Faso's speech had cracked something open. The illusion of unity under Western mentorship was fading. By the end of that week, international think tanks were divided. Some warned that Traoré's confrontation could destabilize West Africa's delicate balance. Others argued that he had simply exposed what was already rotten. But there was one undeniable truth: his words had forced the world to look again at who truly controls Africa's future and at what cost. A senior U.S. intelligence official speaking anonymously to The Atlantic summed it up with surprising candor: Burkina Faso is no longer playing by the old rules. Whether we like it or not, that's a turning point. In the end, Traoré's declaration wasn't just about Côte d'Ivoire. It was about a world order that still treats African truth as dangerous when spoken aloud. And that perhaps is why his voice, calm, firm, unapologetic, resonated far beyond the borders of the Sahel. Because somewhere between Washington and Ouagadougou, the world realized that silence in Africa is no longer guaranteed. In the quiet that followed his speech, you could almost feel the earth breathing differently. The microphones were off. The cameras had stopped recording. But the echo of Ibrahim Traoré's words still lingered, not just in Burkina Faso, but across continents. He had done what few leaders dare. He named names, challenged allies, and reminded the world that Africa's silence was not consent, it was patience. And that patience, he warned, was running out. Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads that mirrors a larger truth for all of Africa. Every nation that seeks to free itself will be tested not just by foreign powers, but by its own neighbors, those who fear the cost of independence more than the pain of submission. Traoré's accusations may have opened diplomatic wounds, but they also opened eyes. For decades, West African politics has been managed through smiles, handshakes, and quiet deals that benefit everyone except the people. Now that veil is being torn apart. He ended his conference not as a man demanding applause, but as a soldier accepting solitude. "It is logical that they encircle us," he said. "They fight for their interests, and we must fight for ours." Those words, spoken with the calm of conviction, are more than strategy, they are prophecy. Because history has shown that when one nation stands up against manipulation, others soon follow. Mali did, Niger did. And now perhaps even ordinary citizens in Ivory Coast are beginning to ask questions once considered forbidden. The West can call it defiance, but for Africans it feels like awakening. Still, the road ahead is dangerous. The enemies of sovereignty never sleep. They come not only with weapons, but with contracts, with narratives, with the kind of diplomacy that smiles while tightening the noose. So Traoré's message is not just to his neighbors, it is to the world Africa is done whispering. And tonight, as we reflect from far away, from Washington, from Paris, from New York, we must ask ourselves, do we really want an Africa that speaks freely, or only an Africa that agrees quietly? Because what began in Ouagadougou as a press conference has now become a mirror, reflecting our values, our fears, and our future. If you believe that truth should never be punished, that sovereignty is not arrogance but dignity, then stand with those who dare to speak it. Please share this message if you believe that Africa's awakening deserves to be heard before it is silenced again. And subscribe not for headlines, but for history in the making. Because one day when the world asks where this new Africa began, we'll remember it began with a soldier who refused to lie.